Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hard-working Americans and their families?
You will! This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefits in your benefit plan. Now prepare to learn,
Plan,
save,
and protect with the FIA Group.
Welcome, everyone, to the Empowering Plans Podcast. My name is Brian O'Hara. I'm joined today by Kendall Jackson, one of our esteemed consulting attorneys. Kendall, happy to have you here today as we record this podcast right on the eve of New Year's. I don't know about you, Kendall, but this has been a long year. I think I've aged about 17 years since January. How are you feeling about the new year?
I'm excited for 2025. I feel sort of the same as you, that it's been like simultaneously the longest year, but also the quickest year at the same time. So it'll be nice to have a fresh start for 2025.
Any big plans for New Year's Eve?
No, I'm the person who goes to bed at 9 o'clock and doesn't even stay up until midnight. Are your plans more exciting?
I don't think so. I think I'll probably be in bed as well. And I hope that when I wake up on New Year's Day, the world will still be there. So here's looking forward to a 2025 full of excitement. But today we'll be talking about a set of proposed rules relating to access to no-cost contraceptives that have been withdrawn by the Biden administration. As a quick background, the Affordable Care Act requires that plans cover certain preventative health services without imposing cost-sharing requirements on patients. Among those preventative services are benefits relating to birth control. As with just about every rule, however, there were exceptions. Last week, the Biden administration withdrew a set of proposed rules that had sought to extend access to birth control. The proposed rules released almost 2 years ago in February of 2023. The rules would have maintained a religious exemption to providing coverage of contraceptive services at no cost to patients, but it would have eliminated the exemption for employers who had moral objections to the use of birth control, but who otherwise didn't qualify for the religious exemption. These rules also would have established a new arrangement by which individuals covered under plans subject to a religious exemption could obtain contraceptive services at no cost, without any involvement on the part of the objecting entity. The departments, Departments of Treasury, Labor, Health and Human Services, etc., they still have the ability to make new regulatory proposals in the future in this area, but it may be different than the current iteration that we've seen. For now, the landscape is unchanged. Here to expound a little bit more upon the current requirements and the proposed rules is my colleague, Kendall Jackson. So Kendall, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, now that these proposed rules have been withdrawn, we're kind of sort of just in a state where things are unchanged. We're sort of just continuing as we were. So we're just going to go over what the current requirements are, just as a little refresher, but there's going to be no major plan changes or really anything to be too concerned about. So like Brian mentioned earlier, under the ACA, self-funded health plans have to provide coverage for certain recommended preventive services without imposing any cost sharing on the member. And so with respect to women, these preventive services include certain contraceptive services, and these are all based on the comprehensive guidelines supported by the Health Resources and Services Administration, the HRSA. Now, the HRSA's guidelines, they really are all-encompassing. It's a broad array of women's contraceptive services. It's not limited to just coverage of contraceptives themselves, like the pill or an IUD. It also includes screenings, education, counseling, follow-up care to remove an IUD, for example. So it's very broad, not just the contraceptives themselves. So that's just something to remember there. So in 2018, the Trump administration greatly expanded on the exemptions that were in place under the Obama administration before that. So prior to 2018, under the Obama administration, only places of worship were exempt from the requirement under the ACA to cover contraceptive services. And so in 2018, the exemption was broadened by the Trump administration to include any entity with a religious or moral objection to contraception, so either of those two. And under that, if the exemption applied, then they would not have to cover contraceptive services under their respective health plan. Now, this would generally apply to all nonprofit or most for-profit employers and plan sponsors with sincerely held religious or moral objections. as well as all private universities and colleges with religious or moral objections. And that is specifically with respect to an arrangement for student health insurance coverage. And so the 2018 Trump administration regulations were actually upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States in 2020. So that really sort of solidified their place. And then, so just to sort of go back a little bit, to qualify for this religious exemption and for the moral objection as well, you have to actually file a self-certification or notice for examination by the federal government. And this has to be filed and available by the first day of the first plan year in which the exemption would apply. And this is generally going to be done through EBSA Form 700. So just making sure that if the exemption applies to your plan and you want to avoid having to cover contraceptive services, that you are filling out this form in due time and well in advance, just to make sure that's all squared away. And so basically with the withdrawal of Biden administration's proposed rules last week, everything that I just mentioned under the 2018 Trump administration regulations is unchanged. And that's what we're following from here on out until we have any potential rules that are proposed and passed in the future by HHS. Based on the proposed rule in 2023 that would have removed the moral objection and then also allowed for individuals to still get access to no-cost contraceptives if they're covered by entities who have the religious exemption. Seeing that proposed rule, it's very likely that we might see something similar in the future. It may not be a priority right now for the departments, but doesn't mean we won't see something in the future there. Now, this is just something to think about and definitely something to consider because access to birth control is obviously very important. It's particularly been a prominent conversation in recent years due to Roe v. Wade being overturned, where the Supreme Court found that there's no constitutional right to an abortion. So at the time when Roe v. Wade was overturned, HHS said, and I quote, "It's ensuring access to contraception at no cost is a national public health imperative," end quote. And they directly cited the Supreme Court ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade. So it definitely makes sense here that the proposed rules are sort of a natural extension of this comment. It's certainly something to consider as abortion becomes more limited. Now that it's up to states specifically, that access to birth control is definitely a big topic and something that we really need to pay attention to. So this is obviously always an area that we are tracking. We're always paying attention and looking for any further developments in this area. And if you have any questions about access to birth control, abortion laws in states that may apply for you, how it affects both ERISA and non-ERISA plans, we are always happy to answer those questions. So we definitely encourage you to reach out if you have anything. And with that, that's all I have. So if Brian, if you don't have anything else, then I think we're good here.
Absolutely. I just wanted to end by saying it doesn't seem like the withdrawal of these rules was any kind of, admission that the proposed rules weren't valuable or anything like that. However, these were rules that were put into place to try and kind of clarify and control rules that were put in by the Trump administration. And obviously, the Trump administration is set to take office again in less than a month. So it seemed like it probably wasn't a good use of resources to continue trying to push these rules when, like I said, with the inauguration less than a month away, we certainly don't know what kind of changes that we're going to see, and that'll be on the horizon. But as always, we will be tracking those and bringing them to you whenever they become available. So, Kendall, I think that's all I have as well. So with that, I would like to wish you and everyone out there in podcast land a happy and healthy 2025. And thank you as always for joining in.